Welcome to the Unconventional Path, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Stories and Ideas. Hello, I'm Bela Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Hey, Mike, today's guest is RT Custer. He is the founder of Vortic Watch Company. This is one of those companies that I came across and I say to myself, what a cool idea. And I had no idea that you could make a successful business out of doing something like this. This was such a cool and fascinating conversation I had with RT, and I think our listeners are really going to enjoy it.
Agreed, Bela. Every now and then you find one of these guests that I'm just amazed where you found this person and kind of how come I've never heard of this. And this is one of those kind of stories. So I'm really excited to hear the conversation. I'm really excited to learn more about this company, and I'm really even more excited to have a conversation with you after the interview. So I think let's get right to it.
All right, we're recording. Hello, RT. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so I was reading your background. Man, you've done a lot of things in your life, but let me lead off with this question. When you're at a non-work related social event, let's say a holiday party, and you get introduced to someone, and after that introduction, they say to you, RT, very nice to meet you. What do you do? How do you answer that question?
I say I manufacture wristwatches. And almost every time they're like, wait, what? Either I get why, like what we were talking about before you hit record, like it's a huge crowded market. Like they're almost concerned for me, like my parents were when I first told them about the idea of I'm going to start a watch company. Or they're like, did I hear you right? Watches, like the
Yes.
stuff we do in Switzerland. And so when I have a chance to expand, I say I run Vortic Watch Company, and like Vortex and TikTok, it's a beautiful clash of old and new. We take antique American pocket watches and we turn them into one-of-a-kind wristwatches, almost entirely made in USA and built right here in Fort Collins, Colorado.
Oh, wow. So yeah, let's let me ask this question. So what was the inspiration for starting a business with that premise of taking old pocket watches, sort of recommissioning them into
Yeah, so the original idea was basically, could we make a watch that was actually American made? The concept or the question that my co-founder and I asked was, why are all watches made in China, Japan, or Switzerland? Why can't we make a wristwatch in the United States? And when we started doing that research to try to get answers to that questions before we, dove in and just tried to make one, we stumbled on the history of what I call the Great American Watch Companies. And there were 10 companies. There was more than that, but there's 10 big companies back in the 1850 to 1950 timeframe, that 100 years. And those 10 companies manufactured over 150 million pocket watches in the United States. This was mostly from Boston to Chicago, all across the Northeast and the Midwest. And they made pocket watches, and these are mechanical movements. So you have to wind them up. They know, but this way before batteries, right? This is 1800s, right? So solid gold cases. But back then, let's put yourself in 1870. We're on a train from Boston to Chicago, because that's really the only way you could do it at that point, efficiently. And you need to know what time it is. There's no clocks. You have a pocket watch. Pretty much everyone, instead of having a phone, you had a pocket watch. And so the pocket watch was the iPhone of the time in the 1800s and early 1900s. Everybody had one. All these companies made millions and millions of them. And it was like an investment, because it was a little mechanical engine in your pocket that had one job and one job only, and that was to tell you the time. And only if you actually wound it and you kept it wound and you, made sure it was on time as compared to the big clock in town or the clock in your house or whatever. So anyway, we stumbled on that history. I'm a history nerd, especially military history. My last name's Custer. I'm related to General George Armstrong Custer. And so I was just raised to ask these types of questions about like, how did we get here? And the business history of those old watch companies is really fascinating to me. One, because they don't exist anymore. You know, they all went out of
Yeah.
business in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And then the manufacturing history was very interesting to me. I studied industrial engineering at Penn State, and so I'm an engineer by trade, and I love learning how things work and how things are made. And so I was just totally hooked, and that's where the idea came from, is let's save these old pocket watches, let's tell their story, but turn them into a wristwatch. And by doing that, we also checked the original box of those pocket watches. The guts of them were made in USA back then. It's way easier to make the bigger parts on the outside of the wristwatch, the case, the glass, and everything else. And so we made one of the first, 100% American made wristwatches since Hamilton Watch Company went out of business in the 1960s. We manufactured one of those ourselves in our basement, just myself and Tyler in 2014. We put that idea on Kickstarter on November 17 of 2014. We just had our 10-year anniversary. And the rest is history. We've sold every watch we've made since. And I like to say sometimes you just have a good idea. So here we are.
Yeah. So I'm trying to understand, get my arms around this. You buy or obtain old old pocket watches.
Correct.
And then you take those old pocket watches, you take the movement out, you sort of recondition it and tune it up, and then put it into a wristwatch case.
That's right. Yeah. So inside a pocket watch, an old pocket watch, most of the cases, or the outside of an old pocket watch, they're solid gold, solid silver, maybe they're gold filled. That case has several hundred, maybe several $1,000s worth of precious metal surrounding the guts of it. And for anyone that's not familiar with watches, the guts of the watch is the dial or the face, the hands that show you the time, and then the movement, which is all the gears and springs inside. So I buy the movement, dial, and hands, all the guts of those old pocket watches from estate auctions. And those estate auctions are buying them in bulk from pawn shops that go out of business. So it's a pawn shop. It's your grandpa was a watchmaker and passed away, and nobody knows what to do with all these, movements that were in the basement. Somebody owned a jewelry store that went out of business. America loses a small business all the time, every day. And a lot of these are jewelry stores, pawn shops, all that stuff. So these estate buyers go in, they buy all this stuff, they sell the wristwatches to somebody, they find an old Rolex and they auction it off for a bunch of money. They get the diamonds and the gold and they melt down the gold and scrap it all. And then they're left with these pocket watch guts that they're like either trash, or they know me and they're like, hey, what do you want to do with these? And so I buy thousands of pocket watches, just the guts. That's all we need. And then I've hired expert watchmakers who are masters of their craft, and they go through and they cherry pick all the cool stuff that I find. They restore it meticulously. It's like a little engine that tells time. So they have to totally gut it and make it tell time again. And then I run, for lack of better terms, a CNC manufacturing shop. So we're cutting the metal to make the rest of the watch here in Fort Collins, which is where, being an engineer came in handy.
Right.
And yeah, we're turning the guts of those old pocket watches now into modern, wristwatches, modern on the outside, 100 years old on the inside.
Right. So are the movements sort of, do they come in standard sizes?
Yeah. So yes. And that's what I think is really cool, is at some point in the late 1800s, there must have been a little mastermind meeting between the people who ran these watch companies. And the companies are Elgin in Chicago, Waltham in Massachusetts, near Boston, Hamilton in Pennsylvania. There was all kinds of other ones. Ball, it's where they were in Cleveland, Ohio. It's where the term "on the ball" comes from. You had a ball pocket watch, right? Like, so much history. But those companies, the people who ran those companies must have got together at some point and decided, hey, if we standardize the size of our movements, we can use the same case suppliers, because there was different suppliers that made the gold and the silver, the outside cases. There was only a few of those, and it was very expensive to do that. And so the industry at some point, I think around the turn of the century, late 1800s, standardized, and there was 0 size, 6 size, 12 size, I think it's 0, 6, 10, 12, and 16 and 18 are the main sizes. We specialize in 10 size, 12 size, and 16 size American pocket watches, which, the 80-20 rule, like about 75% of all American pocket watches are one of those sizes. And those sizes make the best wristwatches. And so yeah, thankfully they standardized that back then. Otherwise, my business model would be almost impossible. Every single watch would be truly one of a kind.
Well, it's just so cool. What a great business, right? You're repurposing these things from 50, 100 years ago, and sort of enhancing them a bit and putting them into use again. What a great story that is. Holy crow!
Thank you.
That should be like a movie.
Yeah. I mean, I was just saying to somebody earlier, I was talking to one of my investors this morning, and I was being really hard on myself, and he encouraged me to zoom out a little bit and just be like understanding of how freaking cool it is that I get to do what I get to do. Because it's amazing. I mean, every watch we make is a one of a kind piece of American history. We can't make very many because, it's hard to find the pocket watches, first to find the really nice ones. And then it's really hard to find watchmakers, like people that know how to fix them. And I've solved all those problems now. And it's been 10 years. So I have this great business, that really, I'm selling something you don't need for thousands of dollars.
Right.
So it's in the luxury sector. So that's fun. All my customers are really cool. I would say 75+% of my customers are entrepreneurs and small business owners. I've changed all my marketing in the last year to all I do is I talk about the American dream, because that's what these watches represent to me for myself. But then also just for like the stories that they tell, right? It's like westward expansion from Boston to Chicago. It's the stories of the railroads and how we got there. It's, the histories of these companies are fascinating because Rockford Watch Company in Illinois, for instance, they were one of the first companies to use crowdfunding. They used a bond that they sold to the city, like the citizens of the city of Rockford. They could buy a bond to help start Rockford Watch Company. And so I wrote a blog about that the other day. The stories just never stop coming, and it's all fun. It's just history, and it's not going to get old.
So this is an interesting market segment, and I will say that in part of my career, I owned part of and ran a very high-end bicycle manufacturing company. Cool. So when you could buy a really good bicycle for $1,500, we were selling them for $5,000.
Yeah.
And it was the same, 9 tubes of steel welded together.
Yeah.
So I'm always intrigued by number one, how do you take a product and elbow your way into this crowded luxury market? And then clearly, there's some one of the geniuses, I think, of Steve Jobs and Apple was when they came out with the earbuds, they were white.
Mm-hmm.
So when you saw somebody and they had white earbuds, you knew they were Apple, right? Yeah. In the beginning, they were the only ones who had white. And so, there's this piece to it as well. So, we struggled with that in the bicycle business because, someone who knew about bicycles could look at our bike and say, oh yeah, that's one of those. But the general public didn't have a clue. So how do you sort of think about that for your business on sort of your brand and what does your brand represent?
Yeah. So to me, there's so many layers and levels to branding, and I look at it like a funnel in some ways, right? Like and Apple's just the perfect example for all of this, but if you look at a funnel, the top of it is branding, then you have marketing, then you have advertising, and then you have sales. And if you are really good at branding, then marketing, advertising, and sales all happen for you, and it's just really easy. And that's exactly what Steve Jobs was the master of, and still is, even though he's gone. I'm wearing those today, right? Like
Right.
it's amazing. When you build a brand, marketing gets done for you, advertising is almost free, and you don't even need salespeople. So I've just always looked at it like that, and everything we touch is this the right decision for the brand that we want to build? Whether it's the brand of Vortic, or I just started a new brand under the Vortic umbrella, which is called Colorado Watch Company, new modern watches that we're making in Colorado. Basically a different revenue stream, from a business standpoint, or my personal brand, or like I'm working on a book for telling my story. I'm also writing in partnership with the company and a few historians. We're doing a coffee table book it's called America Wasn't Assembled, It Was Built, the history of the great American watch companies, right? So we're documenting all the stories, from all these watch companies that I've learned and I've found. No matter what project I'm working on today, how does that develop and foster and create the brand so that marketing ideas come easy and they're basically given to me from the customer? Because it's, a marketing idea to me is you put out that brand and then customers start asking questions. And really, when you do marketing, all you're doing is answering those questions. And so that's amazing. And then as you go down that funnel, advertising is just paid spend behind your marketing efforts and answering those questions. And then I've never had a salesperson. I guess you could say I am the salesperson for Vortic Watch Company, but to me, our salesperson is the website. So if you go to vorticwatches.com, you'll see that I've spent a lot of time and money on that website, making it perfect and beautiful and tells its own story. I read Building a Story Brand by Don Miller early on, and if you read the homepage, it literally says who we are, what we do, how to buy it. Like very, very simple,
Yes.
right? Simple stories. And then back into stories, right? Like all of it, whether it's sales, advertising, or marketing, if you're telling a story that relates to the brand you're building, by the time I finish that story, you want to buy my product. And that's why I'm here with you today. I mean, I don't do a whole lot of advertising. I go on as many podcasts as I can, because to me, if somebody spends 30, 45 minutes plus listening to me, you're not going to listen to this and then not at least Google VORTIC watches.
Right.
Right. And I want to see one. Right. So yeah, that's just from a marketing standpoint. I don't really talk about sales, marketing, advertising. I talk about brand and like, how does this relate to the long game?
Right. Right.
And it's more fun anyway. Sales is stressful. Advertising costs a lot of money. Marketing is fun, but marketing is really branding if you do it right.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things about building brand, and the brands that are really strong often have a community built around them, a community of users or customers, whatever you want to call them. And sometimes they have gatherings that we used to have that in our bicycle business. Once a year, we sort of opened the factory and people could come in and look at how the bikes were being made. And, we had some picnic and food, and we turned it into a long 3-day weekend. And so then those people all of a sudden become all your ambassadors, right? They're out talking and stuff. Do you have anything like that? Do you think about that? Just sort of curious.
Yeah, of course. So my community is based on email. I learned early on that my customer demographic wants to receive emails, not text messages. And not very many of them are active on social media in a, I'm going to buy something because I saw it on Instagram way. And part of that, I think, is just the age and financial demographic of my target consumer for these watches. For instance, Vortic Watch Company sells watches for $3,000 to $10,000. And so, you have to have a certain amount of means to be able to buy one of those. And my business partner is funny. I was, when it was just three of us, him, myself, and just one other person in the shop, I was answering every single email one-on-one for the customers. I was posting on Instagram and all the social media. I was answering every single direct message, all that stuff. I was doing all that myself. And he asked me a question, Tyler did. He said, what if every time you opened your mouth, you spoke to thousands of people instead of one person? And he was encouraging me to just think bigger about, basically sales and marketing. And that stuck with me. And I explored a bunch of different options, between basically social media and all these other options. And I love writing stories. I'm a really good writer. I love telling stories in longer form. And email was really the only thing that stuck out to me as something that I could be consistent with. Not only I'd be good at it, but I could be consistent. And one of my business advisors, I can't remember if it was an investor or not, but he said, if you're going to send an email once a week. Just do a weekly email newsletter and don't stop. That's the thing. Everybody, like when you're, podcasts, right? You can't stop, right? Consistency. And so I think it was March 2020. 2020 was a hard year for me. It was a great year in the watch business. It was a hard year for many of us, I'm sure, for lots of different reasons. But in March of 2020, I was in an active federal lawsuit. A huge Swiss company was suing me, trying to put us out of business. I lost my mom to cancer. And then when the pandemic hit, I was like, who's going to buy a luxury wristwatch in the middle of a global pandemic? Thank God I was wrong and it was the opposite. People bought watches. But I thought all was lost. And for some reason, I decided to send an email and I said, bad things happen in threes. And I told my story and I said, I'm getting sued and, I just lost my mom to cancer and I really need you guys to buy watches because this is stressful. And I think at that point I had probably 3,000 or 4,000 people on the email list, and they're mostly customers and like really active followers. And I got hundreds of responses to that email, starting all these conversations, and all kinds of people bought watches, and people bought like t-shirts and hats and said like, hey, I don't even want the hat. I just wanted to send you $40,
Right.
And so then I was hooked. And so every week for the last, now we're going on, solid 4+ years, I've sent an email every Thursday afternoon for 4 years. And that list, I think yesterday's email went to 45,000 people with a 70% open rate. Just insane. So that's my community. Those are my people. They follow us. They look at the email. Like if they don't get an email on Thursday, I will get a text message on Friday morning saying, "Are you still alive?" Like what is going on?
Right.
And there's lots of strategy around all that. There's lots of reasons why I do it, but really the root of all of it is community and my followers and my people that not only want to buy watches, but also want to see like, how's it going?
Yeah. I think that every really strong, powerful brand has this community around it, right? Somehow they have put together this community, whether it's like you have done through emails, which works great, works for your folks, right? We used to do gatherings that works for our folks. Other people do different things. But if you look at every really powerful brand, influential brand, a brand leader, they all have that sort of devoted customer that's willing and enthusiast. They're more than a customer, man. They're an ambassador. They're an enthusiast. They're like everything you want. Right?
Have you ever read? Oh gosh, I forget the author. It'll come to me. But Superfans. Pat Flynn. Superfans by Pat Flynn. When you're saying this, these are fans, it's the concept he talks about in that book is how to take your customers and your followers and turn them into fans of the brand. Just like we're all fans of, sports teams or,
that's a great analogy.
Certain games or things like that. Yeah. And we buy everything they do. Like we go to the games, we buy the hats and the t-shirts and the swag and branded merch all day, every day. And we've never even played football in our entire life, but like, that's our thing. And for me, that's Penn State. I went to Penn State, and so I'm always a Penn State football fan, right? Like, you can't coach that out of me. And so, how do you develop not only a community like we're talking about, but also fans of the brand? And then Pat, in that book, he talks about how to take those fans and make them super fans, which in his definition is basically, word of mouth marketing. Like, they just talk about you all the time.
Yeah.
For me, that's, they're wearing my watch and like somebody kind of looks at it and they're like, let me tell you everything about this. Like, they just, all they want to do is talk about it. So,
Right.
I love that.
So
I love that concept.
if I buy one of these watches, and I looked at your website, by the way, you're right, man. You have a great website. It's fabulous. And I really encourage people to go check it out. If I buy one of your watches, is it possible to kind of trace back like where the movement came from, who manufactured it, and, put a little story in there as well? Do you guys do anything like that?
So for most of the watches, so we have, I guess we have 3 revenue streams inside of Vortic Watch Company. One is what I call Watch of the Day. So every day, Monday through Friday at 12 noon Mountain Time, I release one new one-of-a-kind watch. And that is a pocket watch turned into a wristwatch. The other revenue stream we have is what I call the Military Edition. And that's once a year on Veterans Day, November 11th, we release 50 pieces of a limited edition that changes in design every year. But the pocket watch inside of that wristwatch was flown on a B-17 in World War II. It's the ultimate piece of military history. It's called the Military Edition, and it's the coolest watch in the whole world. They sell out right away every year on Veterans Day. A lot to unpack there, but that's the second revenue stream. And then the third revenue stream is people sending us their grandfather's pocket watch. I call that Convert Your Watch. And we're really the only company that's built a whole, system and process around what do you do with grandpa's pocket watch. And so those are the 3 revenue streams. And so to answer your question in terms of those, for our Watch of the Day watches, these are pocket watches that I bought from an auction. I don't know a whole lot about them, but
yes,
it says the brand on the dial. So the face of the watch is going to say Hamilton or Ball or Elgin. I can tell you the entire history of that brand, and that's why I'm writing the coffee table book, so you can read the entirety of it, right? But I give you a little blurb about it on the site, on the product. And then I also know there's a serial number on the back of every pocket watch. These companies took meticulous records. And so I can tell you exactly the year it was made and how many of that type of movement they made. Best analogy is cars today, right? Like Ford makes a very specific, they probably make 700,000 of the F-150 in, model year 2024, right? That's what they did in the pocket watch industry. They had serial numbers, they kept track. And so some of them are really rare. They made 100 ever. Some of them they made, like Elgin Watch Company in Elgin, Illinois, just outside Chicago. They made 55 million pocket watches in that factory. And so a couple of their models, they made 1.2 million of that pocket watch. And so those are more of the less expensive ones on our website. We charge basically based on the provenance, the story, the history, the rarity, and the cool factor of the whole thing. I sell art, that tells time.
Yes.
So that's how we do it for Watch of the Day. So if you go to Watch of the Day, it'll say, this one's from 1914. Sometimes I'll include like a fun fact, in 1914, the cost of gas was this or whatever. Or that's the year, that's the same year this, Model A Ford or whatever came out, stuff like that. And so we tell as much story as we can, but it's basically based on the year and like the movement history that we know. The Military Edition, that was a specific pocket watch that was manufactured for the United States Army Air Corps during World War II. Hamilton Watch Company made 120,000 of them, and they were given to the navigators on B bombers. So B-17, B-29, if you flew on a B bomber in World War II and you were a navigator, you had one of these pocket watches. It's how we knew we were bombing the right city.
Right.
The navigator
no GPS,
and
no
watch.
GPS,
No GPS. Yep. And so that is a piece of history that I can't tell you the exact battle it flew in, or the plane it was on, but I can tell you for sure that's the purpose of that pocket watch. It was most likely used in World War II. It was almost definitely in the air over Germany. That's really cool, right? That's the level of provenance of that. The story behind that is insane. And then, of course, when you send me your grandfather's pocket watch, if you know anything about it, hopefully
Sure.
we get those stories and we try to share those stories if the customer is willing. And those are, it makes us feel like we're part of the family. It's the coolest thing in the world to me. And it's an honor to be able to do that for people. And we're literally preserving people's family heirlooms, because otherwise they would sit in a drawer, and that's a shame.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Hey, makes me want to buy a Vortic watch.
Whoops. Here we go.
Success.
No, but that's exactly, that's why it's such a fun thing. We started with the idea of, can we make a watch in America? Which is really, we've come full circle now. My new Colorado Watch Company brand, that's the point, is a modern American made watch, truly solving that problem. But that was the problem we started trying to solve. And then we got into the history of these pocket watches, and it's still American made, but it became way more about the story.
Yeah.
Because the story is, that's why you buy a watch. It's a conversation piece. You don't need it, but you want it, and it's fun.
Yeah. Cool. Hey, so let's switch gears a little bit. Clearly you're got the entrepreneurial gene, right? So talk a little bit about sort of how you got that, maybe a little bit about your upbringing, sort of what was the spark that sort of got you thinking about, hey, after I graduate from Penn State with this degree in engineering, I'm not going to go work for General Motors or IBM or whatever. I'm going to go do something different.
Yeah. So I grew up on a Christmas tree farm in Reading, Pennsylvania. I was a fourth generation farmer and entrepreneur. My great grandfather started that farm in 1941 after he left working for the state of Pennsylvania. And, I think he worked for them for 25 years and didn't really get a raise. And so, said, screw this, I'm going to go work for myself. Obviously, the 1940s were an interesting time in the world.
Yeah.
But he, what a time to start a business. But he was planting Christmas trees in 1941 in Pennsylvania. We had 40 acres. The Christmas tree farm was basically a side hustle for my family when I was born, because it's hard to make money in the Christmas tree business. It did really well in the, until through the 80s. When we hit the 90s, I was born in 1990, but when we hit the 90s, that's when Home Depot, Walmart, and then now Whole Foods sells Christmas trees. And so all these huge retail stores were starting to compete, and it became a lot harder, especially in the 2000s. But the 90s is when that market started to erode. And so my parents both had full-time jobs. They worked in advertising. And they both worked for Leo Burnett in Chicago. That was their big, huge advertising agency. My dad was on the McDonald's account. He would helped make the McDonald's Big Mac jingle, 2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. That was my dad and his team. My mom worked for Pepsi, and they got to fly first class on Pan Am to the Super Bowl, every year as the advertising agency. So I was raised by an entrepreneurial family, small business, and 2 madmen, in advertising, right? And my mom and dad, we would watch the Super Bowl, and they would pause the game, they would mute the game, and we would watch the ads, and they would tell me why Coke said this and why Pepsi said this, and what Macy's was trying to do with that ad. And then somehow, I think because I just played Legos a lot as a kid, and I was fascinated with how things work, I went into engineering, studied at Penn State. And then when I was at Penn State, I ended up studying industrial engineering, but which is mostly supply chain. And my job out of school was with Walmart in logistics. But during college, when I was in my freshman year, the summer of my freshman year, I did College Works Painting, which is a multi-level marketing company. It's like the college painters thing that you see, all over the country. there's lots of different models of them. College Works painting is one of them. And I had no idea what a multi-level marketing company was at that time. But I was really good at it. I was selling Christmas trees when I was 5 years old. So going door to door and selling paint jobs,
Yeah.
that was easy. This is fun. And I did really well. And I did well enough to put a down payment on a home after my freshman year. And so I used that money to invest in the place where I lived for the rest of college. My dad helped me with the financing, but I used the money I made for a down payment. And so, I don't know if it was the validation of like, I'm good at sales, or I'm good at like, networking and talking to people, or I was great at running a team of painters to like actually do the work and like managing people. That was my first business that was mine. It was part of a bigger company in an MLM, but like it was mine. I was solely responsible for the income. And so that I just kind of like thought like, maybe I should be an entrepreneur. Like maybe I should do my own thing. But it was just expected of me that I got a good college degree and I got a good corporate job. That was just expected. So I did that. I checked the box. I worked for Walmart in logistics. I had a $25 million capital budget when I was 22 years old. I was renovating distribution centers, distribution centers that had been built the year I was born, and we were putting in automated storage and retrieval system, robots, conveyor belts. It was the coolest job. And I got a job in Colorado. Like Walmart put me in Colorado in one of the distribution centers after school. And my business partner with Vortic, Tyler, he and I had the idea for Vortic in 2011 when we were still in college, but we didn't really do much with it in college. He called me after I started working for Walmart in Colorado, and he said, "Hey man, like, I'd love to come out and visit you in Colorado. I've been thinking about moving there. Just seems fun. I'm loving like the stuff you're sharing on social or whatever." And he's like, "What do you think about that watch company idea? Like, do you think we should give it a shot?"
Yeah.
And he lived in my basement of the house that I got when I moved to Colorado, and ran Vortic just himself for about 2 years until we could afford to pay me. And I quit the corporate job 2 years in. And that was 2014 when we started, and 2016 when I quit the corporate job and went full time. And like I said, the rest is history. So I think I had a really good mix of nature and nurture there. I was definitely born in an entrepreneurial family, and the American dream was very alive and well in my family, starting with my great grandfather. And then, I was nurtured to get a good education and know enough to be dangerous. And I'm really grateful for all of it, because it set me up for success in what I do today.
Yeah. What a cool story. What a cool story. Hey, I want to start wrapping this up. So is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have, or anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
I would say this thing keeps coming to me all the time, and I keep adding it to my, newsletters that I send. You have to be somewhat delusional to be an entrepreneur. I heard someone say that. I can't remember. It was sometime last year. And it just keeps coming back to me, whether it's delusional or crazy or just, passion gets in the way of logic. I don't know what it is. But you said there's probably a lot of entrepreneurs or people kind of dipping their toe in the water that are listening to this. I'm an engineer, and so I like doing the math. And I for some reason, I did not do the math before I took the leap and started a company. And I am very grateful for that, because I think if you, this whole story that we just talked about was sunshine and rainbows, but in the process, like, there's been a lot of loss, right? A lot of stuff that I couldn't do, or I didn't get a chance to do. A lot of stuff I wish was bigger and faster and easier. I got sued by the largest company in my industry, and thankfully we won, and it's fine and it's over. But I think if you would take me back and play this movie for me and say, like, here's what's going to happen if I actually did the math, I don't know that I would have done it. You know, that corporate job was really cushy. And I could be sitting in Bentonville, Arkansas with a senior vice president of something or ever title with a 6-figure job and a great house and family. But God, that'd be boring as hell.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I'm so grateful that I did not do the math, and I would encourage you to, you know, do a little math. You set yourself up for success, but just try. You know, the worst that can happen is it's an amazing learning experience, and that's how I justified it all when my parents and my family were like, "A watch company? Really? Have you heard of
Right.
Apple?
Right.
An Apple Watch? Are you sure?" Whenever I got that question, I was like, "Well, let's give it a shot. If it doesn't work, I'll go crying back to Walmart and I'll get my corporate job
Right.
back," because they'll be like, "Oh, wow, like, you know how to manage a profit and loss statement. You know what a balance sheet is. You know how to run a business.
Right.
You know how to manage people. Like, yeah, we're actually going to promote you." You know, like all the skills. This has been. I put this in my last email. This has been one of the longest and most expensive masters of business that I could have gotten. And I would do it all over again in a heartbeat. So
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent.
yeah,
Hey, that's a
it's fun.
fabulous summary. Some great advice there. I really appreciate you being on the podcast, RT. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you and getting to know you.
It's been a joy. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm sure I'll see you again soon.
Yeah, Bela, as promised, fascinating interview. What were your key takeaways?
Oh, wow. I had so many. I think here's the things that I really liked about this, right? It's one element is sort of the preservation of historical items, which I think is just important for us to do as a society, as a human beings, preserve things that we've done in the past. So I think that part of it's really cool. And of course, when you preserve relics and things, they can have value, not just to society and history, but oftentimes they have monetary value as well. Hence, it could be a possible business. The other interesting thing is this notion of limited supply, right? They're taking these old watch movements that they're buying somehow and kind of, repairing them, fixing them, and putting them into new cases. So there's just a limited supply, and that automatically in the marketplace generates value, right? There are some of these really boutique car manufacturers like Ferrari and McLaren, and they'll announce, okay, here's our new model XYZ, and we're only making 50 of them, and right away there's limited supply, and they do that very well. And Vortic is similar to that, right? There's just so many of these. So I think that's great. And it has a wonderful story behind it, right? It's just, I can imagine buying one of these watches and you can tell the person who asks you about your watch, even if they don't ask you, you're still going to tell them about the history of the watch and where the movement came from and all that kind of stuff. So it brings a lot of joy. In addition to telling time, right? It brings a lot of joy to the person who purchases it and buys it. So I think those are all the really neat parts. There's some interesting challenges though as well, right? So sourcing your old watches, how are you going to get these? So you have to have these connections out to these estate sales or however these things pop up in the marketplace to kind of gather them together. So that's sort of, again, limited supply, but it's limited supply on your supply side as well. So it's sort of you're managing your supply chain and trying to even it out. So your business is not, you got a big spike of revenue because you found a bunch of these movements and then you don't have any revenue for the next 6 months. So trying to manage all of that. You have to have watchmakers. I mean, I don't know where you go to learn to be a watchmaker. Right. That seems to be like it's you work in a laboratory now making computer chips. Those are the watchmakers of today. So your ability to collect these things is a challenge. Your ability to repair them and bring them sort of up to standards is a challenge. And I think the third challenge that struck me is that these collector markets can be fickle. It can be hot for a number of years, and then for whatever reason, it can get cold, and it kind of goes out of fashion, so to speak. So those were the things that sort of stuck with me. What did you think, Mike?
Yeah, I totally agree with your points, Bela. I mean, it is interesting in the age of the Apple Watch, where Apple is the #1 watch seller, right? But people want this, at the high end, and I love it. I think if you compare a Rolex to this watch, right, this watch is way more interesting. Right now, I don't know where you get it fixed or I guess you'd go to a jewelry store, to a watch repair place to get it fixed, and you can get it fixed. But this seems like the type of thing that you'd be really excited to give to your kid or your grandkid after you're gone, to pass it down, because it goes back 100 years and it's the history of the country. So yeah, all of the things that you said about creating a market and creating demand, it's limited. It's like a raw material. It's like saying, well, we're going to make this out of, some mineral, and there's only a fixed amount of it on the planet, right? I also like that they're building this other business line where they're actually making the watches, right?
Yes.
Because you could see, as the number of these mechanisms that they can kind of find, right, goes down, they can build up the other side of the business to make it, long term. So I thought that was cool. But in general, story's great. I loved his kind of pyramid of brand first, then marketing, then advertising, then storytelling. And he's really, everything is about the brand. And his whole idea of just sending an email out once a week and building his community that way, because that fits his target market. Brilliant, right? Absolutely brilliant. Of course, yeah, you could spend time on social media, blah, blah, blah. But the older, wealthier people that he's talking to, they still love to get an email every week, and they respond to that. 19-year-olds don't, but that's not his market, right? So I thought that was really cool. And him really focusing on storytelling was great. The second piece, maybe to add on to what you said, is his points when you asked him about starting the business, right? And he said, I really didn't do all the math. I did the math a little bit, right? But some of this was, I just knew I wanted to do this, and I had passion for it, and I had to take a leap. And this is what kind of risk-taking is all about, right? That there's potential, but the math may not, you need some luck, maybe a little bit, right? But you're willing to take the risk anyway. And I thought that was cool. So I think that if you're passionate about what you want to do a little bit of math, but don't get too hung up on the math, because probably you'll never make the leap. And yeah, you may fail, but you also may succeed. And this is a cool success story in my view, of a neat product at the right time, marketed and sold the right way, doing something that leaves kind of a legacy, or taking something historical and preserving it and making it useful for people. And I like that. He's not just preserving it, he's making it useful, so it can be a part of his customer or his fan base's everyday lives. Really cool, right? So yeah, it's a little out of my normal price range for buying things, but I jumped right to the website. Again, his story piqued my interest, as he kind of said to you, right? And I went and took a look. And it is a really neat website, and I encourage all of our listeners to check it out. But yeah, that's kind of my main takeaways. Great guest, great interview, cool company. I wish them all the success in the world. And on that note, what do you think? Should we wrap it up?
Yeah, I think so, Mike. Let's call it a day.
All right. So listeners, thanks for yet another interesting entrepreneurial experience. Hope you had a good time listening to this like I did, and found it interesting and insightful. If you have questions about what we've discussed, as always, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is bela.and.mike@gmail.com.
Hey, and if you don't follow the podcast, please hit that follow button on your favorite podcasting application and tell your friends about us, or better yet, write us a review. So signing off from upstate New York. See you all soon.
Sounds great, Bela. From over here in Münster, Germany. We'll see everybody next time. Get it? Time, watch. Bye-bye.
Very good, Mike.